Welcome to another episode of Inside the Mavs. Kevin Gray, Mavs insider for 105 through the Fan, joined as always by my partner, Grant Afseth of Mavs Sports Illustrated, beat writer and insider for all things Dallas Mavericks for Sports Illustrated. Really appreciate you joining us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast for free. Make sure you give the podcast a 5-star rating and write a review while you're there. Tell your friends, tell your fans of the Dallas Mavericks alike to come check out Inside the Mavs, and you can download it anywhere you get your podcast for free. Got a blockbuster episode here on Inside the Mavs because the basketball god smiled on our podcast as of this recording, because we were going to have a whole thing with Jaden Hardy talking to him about all things Summer League and some other things that were happening news-wise. Then Shams Charania, Grant, decides to drop a bomb on a huge Mavericks trade as I bring in my partner, Grant Afseth here. Grant, what's going on?
Well, a lot of Mavericks. That's what's going on for sure.
That's right, because just as we were about to record our show, Shams Charania of The Athletic drops a bombshell of a trade involving the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks, San Antonio Spurs, and Boston Celtics are finalizing a 3-team trade that will send Grant Williams from the Boston Celtics to the Dallas Mavericks. The Spurs will get Reggie Bullock and an unprotected Dallas pick swap in the year 2030. That's right, 2030. And the Celtics will get multiple second-round picks. Now, Charania, with further details on this, the Mavericks are acquiring Grant Williams on the restricted free agent Grant Williams, on a 4-year, $54 million deal via sign and trade, sources telling Shams Charania. Now, of course, Bill Duffy and Eric Hobby completed the new contract for Williams. Bill Duffy, yes, you might have heard that name before, shares the same agent as one Luka Doncic. So a 4-year, $54 million deal sign and trade between the Mavericks and the Celtics gets Grant Williams to the Dallas Mavericks. And Grant, furthermore on this does not preclude the Mavericks from utilizing their mid-level exception. We'll get into some of the more details here in just a moment, but your just reaction to this as the Mavericks, who have been kind of quiet since obviously retaining Kyrie Irving, retaining Dwight Powell, signing Seth Curry and Dante Exum, now make a move on the eve as we record this of restricted free agency, and are going to be getting their guy in Grant Williams here.
Yeah, for sure. I think overall, it definitely satisfies a need for the Mavericks. They needed Grant Williams isn't like the biggest or tallest, I should say, wing player out there. He's not like the 6'9", 6'8", like ideal option that, if you had a dream power forward to throw in there for the Mavs. He's a little shorter than that, 6'6", but the big difference is that he's listed at 236 pounds. After the trade midseason to acquire Kyrie Irving, Dorian Finney-Smith was that bigger 4 for the Mavs, and they had to utilize Reggie Bullock, who's 20 pounds lighter at 200 pounds at the 4, and they just were too small, especially with Dwight Powell at the 5, and they re-signed him. They're going to bring along Derek Lively, slowly with his development. So they did need a bigger 4 with the frame to handle those bigger assignments. So that checks a box there. And then, just offensively, you don't want to add defensive talent at the cost of, fully spacing the floor, being able to attack closeouts, things of that nature. And, just from an offensive standpoint, Grant Williams doesn't fill up the box score with like big scoring performances necessarily, but he's a highly efficient, jump shooter, catch and shoot threat, and he can do a little more of like attacking closeouts and has a frame, a bigger frame for setting screens as well. So there's a lot of nuances offensively where I feel like that it would be an upgrade over what they moved in the trade to kind of basically address that 4 spot.
And for Grant Williams, this is a guy who obviously has tremendous playoff experience. At one point, for folks who don't remember, hit 8 threes in a playoff game at one point in his career. So this is a guy who is not afraid of the big stage when it comes to the playoffs and deep playoff runs with the Boston Celtics. Of course, the Celtics making it to the NBA Finals last year before ultimately losing to the Golden State Warriors. But at the same time, for the Mavericks now, and I had been talking to people about this and saying, look, it's kind of wild that we got to a point in this offseason where their, free agency success hinged on the idea of acquiring either Grant Williams, Matisse Thybulle, or PJ Washington, who has been linked to the Dallas Mavericks as well in various capacities. But right now, this team is in a position to still be able to not only having acquired now Grant Williams, but still in position to acquire Matisse Thybulle. Now, we bring that portion of the conversation in because, again, just before we started recording here, Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports reports that the Mavericks have valued Matisse Thybulle lower than the full mid-level exception that the Mavericks currently have. Now, there's some salary cap gymnastics that have to be done, obviously, now based on them acquiring Grant Williams. But we look to the tweet of one Bobby Marks where he says, looking at the cap ramifications for the Mavericks in this sense, that Dallas now is below the first apron in terms of being $9 million approximately below that first tax apron. Their $12.4 million exception, mid-level exception, is still available, but they cannot exceed that first apron. And they can create $3.4 million in flexibility by waiving and stretching JaVale McGee, creating a trade exception has been created now at $10.5 million with the move of Reggie Bullock to the San Antonio Spurs. So as we look at this, there is still a possibility that the Mavericks not get just Grant Williams, but they could still get Matisse Thybulle as well, who is a two-time All-NBA defensive player, second-team All-NBA defensive player, and a guy that the Mavericks for a few years now have coveted when you've looked at what he has done on the defensive side. The question is, will Portland match him? But just off of that alone, the Mavericks could be in a position, Grant, to really make this thing happen for both Williams and Matisse Thybulle if they decide to do it based on what they do have available to them now.
Yeah, definitely. I think, having that pathway, as you said, to kind of get your way back to a full mid-level exception, value, being able to use that for an offer sheet for Matisse Thybulle, that definitely preserves, I guess you could say, the same standing as you were prior to making that trade. But it'll be interesting to see what Portland is willing to match. Teams depending on just looking at their options with the contract or offer sheet, if you will, to kind of, I guess you could say, make it more toxic for that player's team. You can get creative, with trade kickers, making it a longer term contract, and maybe, at a salary that might be uncomfortable for the team to commit to. And, with Damian Lillard, his situation playing out, maybe it's tough for us to read the Portland TrailBlazers mind for their decision making, but maybe it's, tougher to commit to, a higher, per year salary for 3-4 years, if you will, before you really even know what you're going to get back for Damian Lillard. Maybe they're intrigued by Matisse enough to where that doesn't matter. But that's also why the anticipation for those match windows are so interesting, because sometimes it's a real decision. If the team that made that offer sheet makes it toxic enough, there's real actual calculation that has to go into it. Is this too much for us to match? And then it gets you in a situation where maybe you're not that happy as the receiving end of the offer sheet. Are you going to be comfortable making that offer sheet? So it definitely gets interesting. Where Portland values Matisse Thybulle definitely will have a significant impact kind of on what that may end up looking like in terms of how they load up that offer sheet. And basically, in my opinion, it looks like.
And Chris Haynes of Bleacher Report had reported earlier in the day that the Mavericks intend to sign Matisse Thybulle to an offer sheet. Now, the Blazers do have one full day to match that offer sheet that is provided by the Dallas Mavericks. We don't know necessarily the numbers on that offer sheet just yet, but the Mavericks do still intend to sign Matisse Thybulle to that offer sheet while obviously making the move for Grant Williams from the Boston Celtics. So as we look at this, the needs of this team going into this offseason, Grant, they had to improve their center position. We're still waiting on them to make a move in terms of improving their center position. But one thing that they had to do, and they said that they were going to address, was the ability to defend on the perimeter and get wings that can do that. They are now in position to be able to do so with acquiring Grant Williams. And if they're able to land Matisse Thybulle as well, they have really not only gotten themselves in position to be better defensively, but a little bit younger and a little more athletic, especially in the case of Matisse Thybulle and his ability to defend on that side of the ball as well. So some of the goals that this team that they've wanted to accomplish, they're starting to do so. And you're seeing some of the influence of a guy like Dennis Lindsey, who has come into this front office as an advisor, along with Andrew Baker and others, to be able to help create some creativity, if you will, to be able to maximize what they've done. And I think for me, that's one of the big takeaways here is what they've been able to maximize with the limited resources they've had available to them, starting with draft night, turning the number 10 overall pick into Derek Lively and Omax Prosper, and also acquiring Rashawn Holmes while moving on from Davis Bertans' contract to create that trade exception. Now being able to get Grant Williams on a sign and trade at a 4-year, $53 million deal, which averages a little over $13 million per year, while still being in a position to have some creativity to get another guy that they have coveted, apparently, in Matisse Thybulle as well. You give this front office here a lot of credit for their ability to utilize all the mechanisms available to them, but finding different ways to utilize an amount of creativity that I think a lot of Mavericks fans, and for us that cover this team, were looking for to see if they could actually utilize that. So far, it appears they're starting to do that in a big way to address the needs that they're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I mean, when you look at where they enter the offseason with, they had, as you said, the 10th pick, and their only tradable asset in the future for first-round picks was a 2027 first. Well, they
still haven't utilized yet.
Yeah, they haven't utilized it yet, and they still added talent. And, I think even just, remains to be seen how, like, a Dante Exum can kind of factor in. But, even just seeing that level of creativity, like, that's a low-risk flyer. Like, that's a creative move in addition to all the other moves that have already been made. And now all of a sudden, a team that didn't have those, like, 6'8" wings as well. When we're talking about that need to add some talent at the fourth spot, they have with that 24th overall pick, they have Omax Prosper to fill that role as a development option as that that 4, and then you have Grant Williams as the starter, who's very steady as well. Like that's a lot of talent infusion after having a need 2 players instead of just adding 1 at that spot. And it's still interesting to see what they'll do in terms of the center position. They have 2, I guess you could say, ideally bench players with Dwight Powell and Rashawn Holmes, but they have a raw lottery talent they just added with Derek Lively. So it'll be interesting to see how what they do with the rest of this offseason with the center position, if there's a further move, considering as we said, they did not use that 2027 first round pick yet, or if they're just gonna enter the season and basically bring Derek Lively along, and then maybe he can earn an expanded role if he comes along handling things well over the first couple months. But there's a lot of different options that are presented when you solve some key needs without using all of your mechanisms, then you can really start plugging a lot of different, roster holes. That 4 spot, as I said, that's really solidified now. It becomes a lot easier to say, okay, well, now what do we do with the 5? Because overall, if you part with that 2027 first, something that we always said when we did these episodes is, okay, but you still have needs on the wing. What are they going to do at the wing? So overall, it's a lot of intriguing options in terms of like completing the picture. And overall, I just think another thing that'll be interesting to see is Josh Green's development. Maybe he steps into that 3 spot as the starter with Reggie Bullock, being moved to San Antonio. If they're full go, trusting his development, maybe that's another, internal form of improvement. With him taking on a larger role that we could see, with that opportunity. Because, they tried some stopgap options, like, even Justin Holiday had some starts after he was signed out of the buyout market. Josh Green struggled alongside Kyrie and Luka, down the stretch of the season, but maybe, full training camp, another offseason to develop his game and to see the game film that he has, maybe he can step into that role. And that's another, just a lot of layers of improvement, which is needed for a team that went 38-44 and tanked out the last 2 games and missing the play-in tournament. So lots to like about what's kind of transpired so far.
Well, I think you bring up a terrific point when it comes to Josh Green, because it looks like there's full confidence in him now to be your starting 3 this upcoming season, which means you're going to have at least a lineup based on what we have right now. Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, Josh Green, who I would project to be your starting 3. And then you have Grant Williams there as well. And then at this moment, based on what they have, Dwight Powell will be your starting 5 as you continue to bring Derek Lively along with, obviously, Richaun Holmes coming off the bench. And you still have right now, as we talk here, Tim Hardaway Jr., Jaden Hardy as well coming off the bench, and Seth Curry there as well. So, again, you've got a bunch of shooters who can shoot the lights out the basketball but still can't necessarily defend. And we're thinking and projecting that at some point Tim Hardaway Jr. gets moved, because you're looking at Seth Curry as that replacement for THJ at this point as well. And then if they move off JaVale McGee, that's just yet another piece that you can utilize to be able to improve this roster. So what they've been able to do when it comes to the draft, and now with this move in Grant Williams, and they still may not be done in terms of Matisse Thybulle as well. And if you're able to acquire Matisse Thybulle, now you're really able to utilize some flexibility there as well. Because let's say you acquire Matisse Thybulle, now you can have some flexibility of moving Josh Green maybe to your bench as well, if you decide, if he, as a bench player coming off with his 3-point shooting and his ability to defend as well, that deepens your rotation based on what you have there. So there's a lot of things creatively that Jason Kidd can do with this defense. And more importantly, if they're able to get some kind of shot making, let's say if they acquire Matisse Thybulle there, that's just a bonus for him. But you're looking at what this Mavericks team is doing and the roster that they're building. It looks much more modern. It looks much more athletic. And more importantly, it's much better defensively based on what they're doing and why they may not be done yet when it comes to possibly getting Thybulle to go along with Grant Williams as far as their defense is concerned as well here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think overall, just, thinking about, filling the rest of that rotation as you were analyzing as well. They've also done an effective job of adding, the 2-way contract talents to kind of develop. They have AJ Lawson and McKinley Wright signed, already on those deals for this upcoming season. And, AJ Lawson in particular, he's someone that's, gotten some praise early on. Like, I know it's not the most substantial, like 2 days of summer league practice is like, not earth shattering stuff, but, he's someone that, has stood out. And, as he adds more weight to his frame, maybe that's someone who could be intriguing as like a high flyer, quick athlete who can knock down those catch and shoot shots and, basically just play off of, the star talent. There's a lot of like shot making and, creation, especially as Jaden Hardy develops, behind Kyrie and Luka. So the requirements of those other players, throughout the rest of the rotation may not be that, the like high for what they need to do offensively. So maybe, on the margins, they can leverage those sort of like internal developments on that front. And that's someone to keep an eye on as well. And then, in an event that the offer sheet, because we can't tell the future. So it's like,
Sure.
If Portland does decide to match, at least they still preserve financial flexibility I guess they could break up that full mid-level exception. They can maybe even decide, well, actually, this isn't necessary to stretch and like waive and stretch JaVale McGee anymore. So we don't have dead cap money, on our books for the next, couple years. So I think it just creates a lot more options overall. And, I think the order of operations is something that we like to talk about, when we talk about like roster moves overall, like big picture stuff. And it would have been very challenging just to like kind of, I guess you could say, cold call an offer sheet for a restricted free agent with the available money, and then be hanging in the balance, not knowing what their answer is, and then
Sure.
missing out. And then, the top restricted free agents are gone, like that, not having to sit through that process and risk, that money being tied up and being matched, and missing out on a player. That's also a very, positive outcome by, doing their work early, if you will, by just getting a sign and trade out of the way, for Grant Williams before that, July 6th, tomorrow, time of recording, before those restricted free agents, start being, allowed or eligible to, sign those offer sheets with, other NBA teams.
Another underrated aspect of all of this, because we've talked about what they were able to do in terms of the creativity of getting the sign and trade done with Grant Williams at 4 years, $53 million, a guy who, of course, was the 22nd overall pick back in the 2019 NBA draft, averaging 8 points, nearly 5 rebounds, and shooting 39.5% for three-point range, on nearly 4 attempts per game throughout his career. Signing Kyrie to less than the max is also a big part of this as well, because you were able to get him in there for that 3 years, $126 million. But more importantly, if the contract is structured as such to where he's escalating and making, let's say, $38 million this year and continues to escalate over the course of the next couple of years, with that third year being a player option, you still were able to utilize room to be able to have some of this financial flexibility as well. So again, another win in terms of this Mavericks front office, starting with their biggest prize that they had to keep in Kyrie Irving, retaining him for less than the max, that continue to allow these options to be opened up to them to be able to move certain ways to be able to make this happen. That's just another big part of this that allows the Mavericks now to continue to have at least some more ideas on how they can continue to build this roster. But you talked about the order of operation. It started with getting Kyrie Irving back, but getting him under that max to be able to have some financial flexibility moving forward. And you're seeing them started to utilize that based on their ability to acquire Grant Williams in this way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think another element to it as well is that it's always good when you ask somebody to take less money as a sacrifice and you end up actually getting talent. Because, that would have been an unfortunate situation if, like, hey, Kyrie, could you take less than the max?
That's a great
end
point.
Up missing out. And then Luka as well needs that talent as well to, show that, you're progressing towards getting back to where you were at the very least. Like, a deep playoff run, or at least giving him a shot, like Dame Lillard only wants. He just wants a shot.
Yes. And it's funny you brought that up, because it made me think of Dirk for all those years. How many years did Dirk give money back to this organization by not taking what he could have in terms of the money he could have made, because they wanted to keep the powder dry to try and get whomever they thought they could bring in there to help him, win another championship or those kinds of things. And it didn't necessarily happen. At least this time, Kyrie took a little bit less money and they were able to capitalize on it. And you made a great point as well. The confidence for Luka Doncic, I think, continues to be restored in their idea of what their future looks like for him, because all of this is operating on a timeline for Luka over the next couple of years to see if this team can improve based on what they have available to them and how they move toward getting back not only to the playoffs, but a deep playoff run. I think the confidence for Luka has been restored in what this offseason has done so far, and their ability to show him that not only are they willing to take big swings, which they have done, obviously, getting Kyrie Irving and moving on from Dorian Finney-Smith to Spencer Dinwiddie, but they were able to now to continue to build on that based on what this front office has done for him. I think for Luka, this is a big day for him too, knowing what this front office is capable of for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another, just on top of all of it as well, is that, not, as we mentioned, not moving that 2027 first round pick. If they make, basically convey the 2024 pick that they owe to the New York Knicks, if they, basically avoid that top 10 protection scenario that they encountered this year, then that unlocks more assets to be able to trade next offseason. And then that's when you could get very interesting by kind of reducing the amount of bad contracts that are on the books. Like, the Davis Bertans move on top of all of that, that I guess next year wouldn't have been a terrible contract, if you will, because he's only guaranteed the $5 million dollars. But, just shedding salaries and getting closer to the current deals, like Tim Hardaway's deal, if he's not moved this offseason, getting closer to the end of that deal makes it easier to move everybody, to make that move with picks attached if somebody was to become available. That's tough to necessarily put too much weight on now, because for all we know, we can record another podcast next week and they put the 2027 first round pick for all we know. But, as it stands right now, before any like subsequent moves potentially, transpire, if you will, they at least preserve that path to a bigger move next summer, but without having to be like, you get nothing now, but if you stay patient, maybe something could happen next summer. Like that's a big ask in today's era for superstars, where they turn on the TV and they're getting called overrated because they didn't make the play-in, they didn't make the playoffs or the conference finals. So just maintaining those options while also improving immediately checks. That sounds like a competent overall, like successful set of moves, from where it stands.
They had to get younger. They had to get more athletic. They had to get tougher defensively, and they had to find a dog on defense. Grant Williams is going to provide all of those things for him at the age of 24, a guy who doesn't mind getting after it defensively. It is going to set a tone on the defensive end every single night, and players are going to feed off of that. And now he has a chance to play alongside Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. And the pressure is not going to be on Grant Williams to have to be a guy that, does a ton offensively. His role is very defined here. You're going to defend and you're going to knock down open shots, because you're going to get a lot of that stuff from Luka and Kyrie's ability to penetrate and be able to pass the basketball. If you can knock down open shots, especially from the corners, Grant Williams is going to thrive here in Dallas. And for him, a great place to land, given the star power that's here, what the mindset of this team is defensively, starting with Jason Kidd, and I think how that will mesh with him and this team moving forward. The Mavericks put themselves in a great position to be able to handle that. We mentioned his ability to shoot, the three from the corner. He's a career 43% shooter on corner threes compared to 34% on all other attempts from three. So if he is knocking down those corner threes, much like how Dorian Finney-Smith was able to do throughout his time in Dallas, Grant Williams is a perfect fit for what they're trying to do. And I think the Mavericks making sure that they got a guy at 6'6" who can defend with length, and be able to knock down shots. It's a great move for the Mavericks and what they were able to do here and pulling this off.
Yeah, and I think if you compare to what they had, to start last season as well, like you think about the wings that were around Luka. Well, first of all, you didn't have Kyrie Irving; you had Spencer Dinwiddie at the two. But overall, you look at having Dorian Finney-Smith, Reggie Bullock on the wings, and JaVale McGee at the five. That's a lot more capability, in my opinion, offensively, with a Josh Green, if we're penciling him in at the three, and Grant Williams at the four, being able to attack closeouts. That's a big area that I felt was a limitation last year. It's very, very limiting when Luka gets put into a trap, like a hard hedge. He gives the ball up, and there's a short roll, and then you have a center that's not necessarily a scoring threat, and then the wings that are spacing from the corners are not going to be, the most talented or explosive, whatever you want to call it, like, close out attackers. And they're not going to be aggressive looking to take the contested shot all the time. Having, more capable threats like, Grant Williams, Josh Green out of those situations, that definitely adds a helpful dimension to the offense to, I guess, keep the defense honest. Because the whole point of having that generational talent, with Luka and, also superstar with Kyrie, is that you need to have enough threats around them to where the defense can't, just do a lot of like overloading, overly aggressive stuff. You have to keep them honest to the point where that superstar talent can be maximized and flourished. And if you have the corners being more than just the open, shooting threats and a little more layers to it overall, then there's a lot to like. And, I'm very curious as well, just overall with Josh Green's development, because, I think after, as the season kind of progressed and he got more opportunity with extended run at times, it seemed like they were getting more creative with, actions to get him, the ball in his hands, attacking aggressively downhill. Like there's different layers they can add into the mix. And just having, complementary talents like Grant Williams makes that easier, because you're not basically going to end up wasting the shot clock, funneling the ball to someone in the corner who's not going to be aggressive on that against that tight, catch and shoot three, but also isn't necessarily that like one dribble pull up threat or, rim attacker. So I'm just very curious to see how they put the pieces together. I think another part of it, just a quick part of it, that kind of gets added as well is when you're 236 pounds, you can set some really solid screens as well. So there's more options for, with him being a catch and shoot threat, Grant Williams, he has some shooting gravity to him as well. So you can use more like double screening actions with more effectiveness connecting on the screen at 236 pounds compared to, just being that 200-pound sort of like, just ghost screener that, Reggie Bullock would often be in the, I guess like that pick and switch.
Those veiled
game.
screens, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then, he'll have the opportunity to showcase more of his game as well, a little bit like too, like not obviously like, crazy stuff. We're not going to say Grant Williams is going to reinvent himself with the Mavericks, but, when you do have those switch opportunities, with Grant Williams setting the ball screen, if he's able to drive, after that, that flare out or that pop, he's going to be able to take advantage. Reggie Bullock, it was mostly just quickly into like a get action for Luka Doncic to get the ball back, or Kyrie, like having more, like he's not necessarily like a explosive scorer by any stretch, but just a little more capable, goes a long way, for the unit overall, when you're kind of like, surrounding superstar talents, and trying to get the best out of your half court offense.
And another aspect of this, too, with this entire deal, we've talked about some of the compensation for this deal with Grant Williams, obviously with the Mavericks acquiring him. Part of this, from Adrian Wojnarowski as well as he at ESPN, Boston and Dallas will each receive 2 second-round picks as a part of this deal as well. So the Mavericks, who we have made fun of in terms of not having a second-round pick for the next 7 years, are able to acquire 2 second-round picks in this deal as well, which, again, adds to the flexibility in what you can start to do with some moves if you're trying to acquire maybe an Ivica Zubac from the Los Angeles Clippers, something that you can possibly do to address your center position. That's just another massive aspect of this deal is not only you get a young 3-and-D guy who with some, toughness and athleticism who can knock down corner threes, but you also are able to get some real draft capital as well in terms of a couple of second-round picks in this deal as well. So just yet another aspect of this deal for the Dallas Mavericks here.
Yeah, if you can kind of create those extra value adds, like, a lot of people, when they criticize or a move that any team makes, not just the Mavs, just any team, and they're throwing sweeteners into a trade, sometimes people are like, did you really have to throw those second-round picks in there? So having, getting those types of assets back in, a deal of this nature, as you said, like they were pretty depleted for like 7 years for my understanding, for second-round picks. So, getting 2 puts you in a position where if you have flexibility during the season, you can take flyers on, guys like that were moved midway through, like, Rui Hashimura, who ended up being a playoff, rising star, if you will. Like he had some standout moments. I know the way his season went was like kind of like previous seasons wasn't fantastic, but, Cam Reddish was another name that was available for, just some throw-ins. And then, even like the Indiana Pacers, I know they absorbed, the contract, but Obi Toppin went for just 2 second-round picks. So it just creates a lot of options that you may otherwise not have had to add an additional rotation player midway through. Because overall, if we're evaluating it right now where it stands, we've touched on a lot of things to like about, if, player development goes well for Josh Green, Grant Williams fits well to 4. They have rookies, maybe 4 months in, 3 months in, whatever you want to say, maybe they're further along and then, things are looking well. And then you have those 2 second-round picks to be like, okay, well, maybe we just need, a solid, 3-and-D wing to throw into here on our bench. Well, you don't have to rely on the buyout market purely to sign a minimum contract like they did last season with Justin Holiday. Maybe you can take a flyer on a little more like dynamic option, if you will, by having more readily available assets. And I guess the other part of the equation, though, is that they don't necessarily have the great like cheap expiring contract to be able to use in that type of a trade. So it's not like the setup is picture perfect, but that's also going into having those extra assets, because then you might be able to have an easier time facilitating a trade if you have those extra assets to kind of include, to say, okay, well, can you also take this contract, this smaller contract as well, while we basically take back that player that you kind of are done with. So overall, yeah, just creating those sort of transaction cycles goes a long way. And sometimes teams, as we've said it quite often, like they're pretty like liberal with their use of those second round picks.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just overall, like you can sit on them, wait later, and you still have the 2027 first round pick. So that's 3 picks that could be used this offseason. That creates some more flexibility for you as a front office, as you kind of just reevaluate where things stand. And, as the offer sheet situation plays out with a restricted free agent, like, Matisse Thybulle, maybe if that doesn't work out, for all we know, there's at least more, options to be, okay, what's next? Well, we have these 2 second round picks and that 2027 first. What are our options at our disposal? What can we get packaging a Tim Hardaway Jr.'s contract? Things like that become more, viable if a team isn't necessarily enthusiastic this summer about taking on, like a Tim Hardaway Jr., in his contract. So yeah, just more flexibility and options, as I guess you could say insurance in case things don't pan out right away.
Well, I don't think I'll say on this as we get ready to close our episode here is that Nico Harrison and this front office were under a tremendous microscope going into this offseason, and they had a lot of things to do to try and improve this roster. They still have a couple of things to improve in terms of their center position, which we have heard and known that they are wanting to improve there. But one of the main goals that they had this offseason was finding a big 3-and-D wing that could defend and knock down shots from the outside. And they were now able to do that, whether you're as high on Grant Williams as you are based on what he is now, or maybe not as high on him, even with some of the things that we saw, throughout the course of the playoffs this past season. Objectively, this is a really good move, I think, for the Dallas Mavericks, given what they were attempting to do to get younger, to get tougher physically, and to be able to be better defensively as well. I think they were able to do that in terms of Grant Williams. And you give Nico Harrison, Andrew Baker, Michael Finley, Dennis Lindsey, this entire front office, a lot of credit for utilizing what they had and really turning not a whole lot into quite a bit so far this offseason when you give what they were able to do in the draft and now what they've been able to do so far in free agency. They've been able to turn this into a nice offseason thus far, but credit goes to this team for, at least for the most part, as of now, sticking to what they said that they were going to improve on, while still looking to possibly make a move with Matisse Thybulle if they're able to pry him away from Portland, but then still having to really address the center position going forward, whether it be a stopgap that's better than what you have in Dwight Powell as you bring Derek Lively along, or being able to get this platoon of centers ready to go to be able to have some kind of effect, knowing that you've got some better perimeter defenders now to go along with that. Give Nico Harrison in this front office a lot of credit for what they've done so far now.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot more options, a lot more, I guess you could say peace of mind as you're building your supporting cast before, making an offer sheet to Matisse Thybulle or, whatever else may end up being the case. It's definitely a lot more clarity, overall on July 5th compared to, after the scouting combine or even after the draft. That paints a clearer picture. And I think it'll just be interesting to see. I'm curious about the center position, as you said. I guess you don't want to bury your lottery pick, deep by investing into another option too heavily. So I guess you kind of have to tread water a little bit if you're confident in immediate impact being like more realistic than some may view it. But if it is truly a multi-year kind of perception, like maybe year two he could be a positive contributor, then maybe looking into flipping a contract, seeing what can happen with those 2 second-round picks becomes more of a viable option, and maybe a swap. Like you don't want to leverage too many swaps,
Sure.
in the long run, but maybe with more creativity there could be maybe not like a dominant option, obviously, or a top 10 starter option by any stretch, but maybe there's a team that is ready to basically shuffle salaries around, and has a center available. I don't know where they stand now, and I don't really know what necessarily is like taking place in the last little while. But Atlanta is a team that is kind of interesting. The draft period, there was reporting of potential trade down from 10 to 15 with the Hawks for Clint Capella. That didn't end up transpiring. He's got a pretty high salary for a team that used a top 10 pick of their own on Onyeka Okongwu, and he's going to be due for a contract next summer. Maybe teams like that, you can circle back and be more confident in using like whatever contracts or assets that don't put you out too far or too much in the future, and just evaluating where they stand as their options kind of become more dwindling, if you will, as the season or the off season plays out. Because it's not just like your board isn't the only one that's impacted by players committing to other teams. If they review their situations, maybe there's room for a talk down of some kind for some starting caliber center out there. But again, it just goes back to the whole, you don't want to invest too heavily into someone in front of Derek Lively if you have a lot of confidence in him. And considering using a lottery pick on him, I would hope that the franchise would have a lot of confidence, especially when you're lobbing the Tyson Chandler comps out there. Anyone wearing a Mavs logo seems to view Tyson or Derek Lively as a comparable potential future Tyson Chandler, if you will. So more power to him.
Well, him and Tyson hanging thick as thieves so far as Mavs summer league practices are concerned. So maybe that's a good thing that Tyson Chandler's right there next to him, helping him get better as quickly as he can to be able to make an impact for this team. But the Mavericks acquire Grant Williams. He signs a 3-year, $54 million, or excuse me, a 4-year, $54 million deal as part of a sign and trade with the Dallas Mavericks. Grant Williams, the 24-year-old former product out of the University of Tennessee, who, of course, has helped the Boston Celtics in their NBA Finals and Eastern Conference Finals runs over the last couple of years, and shares an agent with Luka Doncic, is now going to be a member of the Dallas Mavericks. Again, a 4-year, $54 million contract that is part of a 3-team trade that not only sees the Mavericks acquire Grant Williams, but they get 2 second-round picks as well as part of the deal to be able to add some draft capital moving forward as well. So the Mavericks and Nico Harrison and that front office cooking as the offseason has continued to go on. Their biggest move so far outside of retaining Kyrie Irving, Grant Williams now going to be a part of the Dallas Mavericks. Grant, tell the folks so they can find you and what you got going on, man.
Yeah, for sure. When Grant Williams gets traded, the summer league stuff, gets a little more challenging to, grind out before the games get going. But yeah, I'll have, at some point, a breakdown of Grant Williams on DallasBasketball.com and some on my Twitter feed as well. And then, just thorough coverage of the Mavs summer league all throughout. There's going to be a lot of content about Jaden Hardy, I'm sure, and the rookie players and whatever standouts that end up, kind of showing out in Las Vegas. Like last year, AJ Lawson was a standout, and I, interviewed him and did a, deep dive into his impact. If anything like that happens, I'll definitely work on getting that stuff out for sure.
Well, like I said, prior to us starting this episode, we were going to have a whole episode featuring Jaden Hardy and obviously talking about some of the things with the Mavericks Summer League. But hey, when the Mavericks make a move, you got to be able to pivot. And that's exactly what we did in this episode. What we will do is, in terms of our Jaden Hardy episode, it will be a mini-sode, if you will. It'll be about a 20-minute episode. Obviously, our interview with Jaden Hardy will be on there. We'll talk a little bit about Mavericks Summer League as well to get you primed and ready for that as they get ready to begin their summer league schedule in Las Vegas. Going to be taking on the Oklahoma City Thunder. Shout out to Chet Holmgren and the Thunder. They're going to be taking them on over the weekend. So we'll get that episode out to you. Like I said, it'll be a mini-sode with a little bit of breakdown with Mavs Summer League and, of course, our featured interview with Jaden Hardy of the Dallas Mavericks. He's going to be the man in Vegas for Jared Dudley and that Summer League squad. My man's going to get about 25 shots a game, it feels like, going into Summer League. So Jaden Hardy's going to be the man. We'll have him on our next episode, a mini-sode right here for Inside the Mavs. Again, you can find Grant on Twitter at Grant Afseth. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports, giving you your Mavs news and nuggets as well as they come along, and obviously reacting to the news at what the Dallas Mavericks are able to do in getting Grant Williams. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. That ends this episode of Inside the Mavs, our emergency pod, if you will, because of the Grant Williams trade. We really appreciate you joining us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast for free. Make sure you give the podcast a 5-star rating, write a review of the podcast while you're there. You can also watch this on Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Grant's channel on YouTube as well, at Grant Afseth. If you're going to be watching this episode again, you can listen to it anywhere you get your podcast for free. For Grant, for Kevin, this has been Inside the Mavs. Appreciate you joining us on this episode, and we will see you on our next episode of Inside the Mavs. We'll talk to you later. Peace.